Happy Friday. My name is Kat Navarro-Lee, and I've been doing a series of interviews that I like to call Faith and Flow, where I talk to people in entertainment who are believers in God, and we talk about their faith and belief and how that intersects with a career that can be very unstable in entertainment. I'm really excited to be sharing this next interview with you with my friend David On. He is an actor, he's also an editor, and he's a writer, and he's an activist. I am just really thankful that he took the time to talk to me because he's one of those guys where you always learn something when you chat with him. He's very intelligent and he could have been anything. If he wasn't an actor, he could have been whatever he wanted. And before he was in entertainment, he was in finance. We talk about that whole journey with picking a career that can be very unstable. We talk about the current happenings in our world with the social, racial injustice. And I just really enjoyed hearing his unique perspective on things. So thank you guys for watching. Thank you, David, for taking the time to talk to me. Hi, so thanks for taking the time to talk to me. I know it's kind of early in the morning and right now everybody's, I know if I could, if I didn't have a baby, I would be sleeping in still right now.
Oh, no, no, no. I mean, normally it's pretty good, but I had a pretty late night. I was at the protest last night or yesterday. Yeah, it was just kind of long day after.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, tell me a little bit about the protests. I want to hear some
It
of
was good.
that.
One, it was very peaceful, very well organized, very peaceful. I had gone with a bunch of kind of Asian actor friends and coalition and been kind of involved in like online campaigns and that type of thing. But this was kind of our first chance to go just show our solidarity in person. And the turnout was, I don't know what the real numbers were, but it was a lot of people downtown yesterday.
I saw some news coverage and it was like 3,000 people.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's pretty crazy. It was good though. It didn't feel too tense in terms of like the police and protesters clashing or anything like that. There were kids there. Some people brought kids, and it still felt relatively safe during
Okay.
the protest.
Oh, that's so good to hear as opposed to some of the other things that we've seen. But yeah, we'll get into more of that later. But first, I wanted to talk to you because, every time we have a conversation, you're always very intelligent and positive. And so I wanted to see how your faith and your belief in God comes into play with your outlook on life and also just in your career and how you navigate being in a career choice that can be very uncertain
Yeah.
and juggling that.
Well, I think it's interesting because I originally started in finance. Like, I don't know. I feel like a lot of Asian American.
Like a good Asian.
Yeah. Good. Money type of industry. And, at the time, it was I graduated kind of around the time of the financial crisis. So seeing a lot of the ugliness of finance and greed and everything like that, it was almost impossible for me to see how any type of mission could be done in finance. It seemed like it was just greed is good over there. And I'd always loved film, and actually, God showed was calling over and over again, not through my intellect or my academics, but actually through art. So I got like scholarships to college because of my art, not because of my academics.
Oh,
And
okay.
it just took me a long time to really listen to that calling, because there is that like do a stable job, and you can justify it very easily, right?
Right. That security.
When the financial collapse happened, it was like, okay, now you have a choice. Now you kind of have it. It's kind of like a reset button. So what are you going to do with it? So that was kind of like the calling of it. And then I reconnected back to the artistic side and never regretted it. Absolutely never regretted it.
Do you feel like there were certain moments where you really felt God directing you towards your craft and away from a life of security?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, nothing is really secure, but really towards this career choice.
I think it's interesting because I think when I was younger, I was very involved in church. I led worship and everything like that. Um, and I think I was always looking for the inspiration moment that God like changes everything, or like a light beacon hits and it's like, go that way. I don't think I don't think it was really like that. It was like a constant that was always there. But
Mhm.
my heart was open to listen to, but I recognized that music or that voice was always there. I just oftentimes wasn't really open enough to listen to it. And certain Cairo moments in my life that I was open enough to, it felt like, oh, that's always been the direction. I just needed to rediscover that.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think for a lot of people it's like that. Like it's not always some big voice that you hear or something super obvious, even though for some people they may have had those moments. But a lot of times it's the consistent, just kind of like the way that you communicate with God in your everyday life. So for you, how do you hear from God? Is it, do you have like a quiet time, or how do you feel that you most connect with your creator?
So for me, I think the biggest thing for me I found is nature and disconnecting. So I need to go by myself to a quieter place and have enough time. So for me in LA, hiking has been like the biggest thing. I won't just do my devotions. I won't just wake up and do my devotions like right away at home. I will go for my morning hike and it will take me maybe 20, 30 minutes to get to the top of the mountaintop before I do my devotions. And during that time, it's like just quiet meditation time, so that I set it up that I'm going to meet God and we're going to have a chat and have a conversation. And that really puts my head in the right space.
What did you do when stuff was closed?
I tried to do more. I tried to do more meditation before I opened the Bible. I think before, when I was younger, it was more kind of like a, I hate to say chore. That's not exactly the right word, but it was like a checklist. I should do my devotions in the morning. But I think when I don't quiet and meditate before I do it, then it's hard for me to hear the voice. It's hard for me to take it in. And then journaling also is really helpful, because sometimes what message I'm taking has a kind of, it's not always right applicable today. It's a little bit
Mm-hmm.
delayed, or it could take, hey, I remember last week I wrote in my journal something about this, and then it becomes clear. And that's kind of how I hear the voice. And when I was really young, I used to do the whole like, God, I'm gonna turn to a random verse in the Bible and just find the topic that I need, and it would like, I would open it up and it would be like, son of so and so, son of so and so, and I'd be like, what am I supposed to
What
get from
is
this? But
I've done that too. Of
yeah,
when you don't know where to start in prayer, and then you just kind of turn and think, oh, God's gonna just show me. I'm just gonna flip this open.
yeah, and testing God, like, all right, it's the lottery. So if you're real, then inspire me. And you're like, oh, it doesn't work that way.
Yeah, that's true. That's funny how sometimes we have these ideas of how we think God is going to be speaking to us.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Uh, how do you think in your career that God is asking you to move, or how do you think as an actor and a Christian and an Asian and all those different things in one, how you can be a light in your industry, and if you felt specific ways that you've been called in that arena?
Well, I think it's interesting. I mean, these whole incidents lately and the kind of like galvanization of everyone behind Black Lives Movement, it kind of made me reflect on um, kind of the relationships that God has blessed me with growing up. I had a lot of Asian friends that they didn't understand, or they didn't really have friends, close friends outside the bubble of Asia.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of took that for granted how exposed I was very young and continue to. And like some of the closest people that I consider my family are not of my race at all.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've realized that at least a niche that and purpose that I may have is being more of a bridge between cultures and stories. So there will be Asian American storytellers that tell Asian American specific stories, but I may be a little bit further on the fringe of that and the bridge between cultures. And so I'm looking for the opportunities to tell those stories and to try to kind of bridge that into my craft. So that's been the thing that God's been kind of speaking to me lately, pretty recently. Yeah.
That's beautiful, because when you are actually exposed to more of that, you can speak to that on an honest level in your stories, whether you're writing or whether you're acting. Because it's true that I know that a lot of people can be very sheltered in their own bubble.
Hmm. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just kind of, and I think you need those voices as well, right? Because obviously Asian Americans, we definitely have not had enough exposure of our voices and our stories. So,
Mm-hmm.
I have friends that are telling stories of like 626 life and like, like Alhambra life and stuff like that. Let's do boba and rice rocket in the 90s. Like, let's do all that. But I think in terms of my contribution could possibly be in a slightly different arena. And so it's very much an American story. My parents immigrated over here and my mom loved film. That's what brought her here, was she wanted to kind of be integrated into a wider world. So it was great. Yeah.
When you first started in the industry, were your parents a supportive, or were they the traditional, as what people think of traditional Asian parents, of wanting you to be in a doctor or lawyer?
Without putting my parents too much on blast, I think I'll just say if I wasn't able to start making money, they would not necessarily be the most supportive. But
If you were starving.
if I was short films with my friends for years and years, I don't know if they would be that supportive. But the first time that I was making comparable money to like what I was making in finance, my mom was like, "Oh my gosh, I have a friend who's a journalist and she wants to do an interview and I want to be a part." And she like bought 100 copies of the article that hit Taiwan and stuff like that. So I think there's actually quite a lot of parents that they love film, they love art, and they're very worried that their children can't stand up and can't raise a family, make money off of it. But if you could prove to them, unfortunately, if the world validates enough that you have a chance to, they would be 1,000% in support of it. But they don't want to,
Yeah.
they don't want to gas you up and kind of have you be the delusional artistic kid,
Right.
right? So I think it's funny. I have a lot of friends that they're like, "Man, they're so hypocritical. Now they're so supportive and they want to see all my movies." And I'm like, I think they were always supportive. They
Mm-hmm.
were, for them, I had a really nice conversation with my dad. It's for them, it was so far away of a dream. So for them to think it could change in one generation is not really realistic to them.
Mm-hmm.
So, but if you can do it, or if you can have an inkling of a chance of doing it, then they're kind of like, "Is this possible? Is this really possible?" So it's
Yeah.
kind of, so then they might be supported then. So
I think so too. I think with any parent, what they want the most is just for their kid to be able to be okay, to be financially okay, and to not
yeah,
have to struggle. And so what that's looked like in the past has been different from what they're maybe able to see now with the different career choices and opportunities. So
right,
I think they'll probably be the biggest fan when they start seeing that, hey, I don't have to worry that you're going to be homeless.
yeah, yeah. And I think every parent there's no parent that doesn't want their kid to be successful and do what they love. Like,
Yeah.
to have that gift, they want their kids to be happy, but sometimes they think, as immigrants or whatever, you have to do a career that you may not love. But if you can have both, they would love that for their children if they really love you on that sense. So mine do.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're supportive now. They still worry, obviously, but I think less so now because it's been many years now that I've been in the industry.
Being in the industry, have you been able to have conversations about faith and God with perhaps people that you know in the industry that aren't believers? Has that conversation ever come up?
Yeah, I think the older I get, the more I realize that it's actually a key component and is a key source of strength for a lot of people. And even if it's not my specific Christian faith, I can still have conversations about people's other faith, and we kind of
Mm,
can exchange ideas. And it's really open, actually. It's kind of, I think my biggest gift at looking back on, I took an elective in college that was comparative theology, and we had Islam, Judaism, Hinduism, and Christianity. And they brought in clerics and high scholars from every thing. And we had to read the Quran. We had to read the Torah. We had to read everything. And it was just, you realize there's actually a lot in common. Now, there are key differences, but a lot of principles and a lot of how people relate to each other and treat each other is actually really they cross quite a lot. So I'm typically not the person that actually does stuff like this and talks about my faith like very openly.
mhm.
Um, I tend to try to build relationships first, and then like kind of happens over like a very long hangout, and then all of a sudden we kind of go into those deeper conversations. It probably starts with like, "Do you think there's UFOs?" And that keeps going into like,
Yeah,
"Hey,
right.
yeah."
And I'm
So
the same way because it really is about genuine connection rather than going up to somebody and like trying to convert them or something like that, which is not,
yeah,
I don't think, effective usually. But having that genuine relationship with people and caring, and then if that comes up naturally, then it's very authentic.
and like a lot of my pastors over the years have pointed out that Jesus did that. Oftentimes he didn't just preach, and if anyone could preach, it's him. He didn't just preach the message. He would care for the people's needs first. Often he would feed them. He be with them before there was a dialogue, the high,
Right.
right? So yeah, so I'm not trying to put people on blast, but that's sometimes why I see like kind of the street side past a preacher as not being bad, but just maybe being ineffective, is because
Hmm.
there is no relationship there. So there's not really an open heart to really hear your thoughts and the message. So
That's
yeah,
true. Like I think that saying where people don't really care what you have to say unless they know that you care,
right.
that's pretty true. That we listen to people that we relate to or we feel like that they do care in some way.
Yeah, and that they know you and they understand it. Yeah.
As far as everything that's going on, the social unrest in our country and the protests going on, and you being out there, do you feel that your faith and your relationship with God has kind of maybe really pushed you into being active in that arena also?
Definitely. I can say a big contributing factor is, I've gone to churches that I don't know how, but just predominantly were African American. Um, I think for me, so like I grew up in an Asian only church, and I led worship. But then, with the closer you are to the soup, sometimes you see some of the flaws in the leadership, right?
Hmm.
And so I saw that sometimes in leadership, there can be other motivations for them being in leadership. And I'm not saying everyone, but
Right.
when you see it, it's kind of like a shock to you that like,
Yeah.
gosh, you're a spiritual leader. How can you act this way? Like, it doesn't make sense. So, when I first came to LA, I went to a lot of different churches. But the one that just kind of resonated to me a lot was one church. And, PT back in the day, it was like 20 people at a rented out Korean church on Tahunga. And that's one church. And it was just like really, really small. But just like, at least he was speaking, wrestling with really hard truths. And oftentimes he would not necessarily have an answer.
Mm-hmm.
For me, a lot of my church brothers and sisters were African American for the last 10 years. And, I could see the headlines of, Trayvon Martin and Eric Gardner, and multiple people. But in my, say, acting community that may not have been as much African American, it was like a news headline that's like a little bit arm's length. But in our church, it was devastating. People knew them, their brothers and
Yeah.
sisters. They were telling their family, don't go outside, and it's like, as a church, it was mourning all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And, not that I could fully understand what that is, because it's not necessarily my family, or I was afraid to go run outside. But as a church community, it hit first home. So when this comes around, I'm much more activated early because I've been mourning with them for a long time. So I understand that this isn't just one incident. It's been happening for a long time. And they've tried to pray about it and vigil about it and write letters and petition. So this has just kind of been the boiling point for a lot of people. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's great that you are out there, because I do feel like our faith does call us to live that as well, and I feel like that's part of it, you being out there. How important do you think it is for us to have like for peaceful methods of protesting, or what do you think of that?
Um, trying to be careful on my words because I don't.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I know. It's a very it's hard, right? Because we are in a time where we are fighting for something very important. So
Yeah,
I just was wondering what your thoughts were on what the most effective methods of getting that message out are.
I do think peace. I do think peaceful protest is the way through. Peaceful protest, voting, and all that is the way through. But a lot of people, I feel like a lot of people are like, oh, it'd be great that you guys are protesting, but they can't hurt buildings and break buildings. Like, that's terrible. Like, don't do that. And I was like, you're kind of assuming that both sides are playing fair and understanding, right? That
Mm,
if you have peaceful protests and you see how heartbroken these people are, then people in leadership and power would change, because clearly they would soften their hearts and they would do the right thing.
yeah, and not
But
always the case, right?
not always. And I think that's the hard, shocking thing for people, is to know that there are people with such cold hearts that they would never they don't want to do the right thing. And that's kind of where the problem started. So,
Right. Hmm.
they can feel empathy, but they don't understand how anyone can. And so that's kind of like the weird shocker. So that's kind of like the lopsided. There other I'm not calling for violence, but historically speaking, even for the Civil Rights Voting Act to go through, there was the threat that Martin Luther King wasn't able to control people that were fed up, that there would be riots on the brink, right?
Right. Hmm.
So I wish it wasn't that way. But historically, if you go through history, it's hard to see an example where pure peaceful protest with absolutely nothing else and just voting did lead to significant systematic change. So I think it would be great if leaders just soften their hearts and just you know but in the Bible there was a lot of examples of that, right?
Right. Yeah.
Moses and Ramsey, it wasn't peaceful before Ramsey his let the Jewish slaves out, right? It took
Right.
so many plagues and so much hurt and anguish before he finally relented. And so I don't know. I hope it doesn't go that way, but I also see the repetitive message, and when I'm praying in God, I'm like, what is the grander scheme of this? Because I feel like we're in some ways in a biblical story all over again. You know?
Right. Thank you for speaking to that. I mean, it wasn't really the direction I was thinking of having the conversation, but so hard to not think about, like in this specific time that we're in, as far as how can I further, be a light for God, and also be able to help make change in the most effective way.
Yeah,
So thank you for talking about that.
yeah. I'll be
By the
honest.
way, okay, go ahead. What were you saying?
I was gonna say, I'll be honest. Like in my writers group and stuff like that, we've had real honest conversations where like, is anyone having a tough time being artistically creative right now? Because we feel like it feels insignificant next
Mm-hmm.
to everything else. And
Right.
yeah, I got stuck. I couldn't open a page, final draft. Um,
Yeah.
and I think it's slowly I'm starting to be inspired by other artists that they're finding their unique creative way to contribute to this change. Not just necessarily even making an art piece, but making creative proposals that are completely outside the box of what has been happening. So yeah, so I think there's a lot of different ways we can bring our artistic mindset into this movement of change.
Yeah, I think being an artist, you feel so much on such an intense level that there's different ways that you can really express that, whether it's telling a story like Chris was just watching Just Mercy yesterday. And I
Mm,
mean, those stories that just move you, and
yeah,
then even being in the protests and being out there as you're doing, taking from those experiences and what you actually see so that you can write about that and share what happened in honesty
yeah.
in an art way.
I've been like re-listening to like music like MJ and Tupac that I guess when I was a kid I loved it and I understood it to a degree, but it felt so timely again and on a deeper level. And I was like, wow, that was created like 10, 20 years ago. And
Mm-hmm.
it became a voice. Or even on a more funny level, I don't know if you saw videos of like Batman and Spider-Man like walking amongst the protests. They had like cosplayers volunteered. And
I didn't, but that is
yeah,
very much something I want to see.
yeah, someone had a cosplay Batman and he was walking through the protests and there was tear gas everywhere and people were like, Batman's here. Batman. I, and I was like, wow, even something that I would think is so kind of escapist entertainment in certain times is like an anchor point for people to feel inspiration and like hope, you know?
They should have a superhero, like I don't even know what you would call it, some superhero to bring peace to a racial divide.
Yeah, yeah. Like the Captain Planet of racial humanity.
Yeah, I think you should write it, David.
Okay.
Abridge that whole spectrum of the geeks for uh, superheroes and that whole thing with also social justice.
What do you do? I bring together.
Right. I love that. Oh
Yeah,
my goodness, I love that. Well, I think Zoom might be cutting us off pretty soon. So
yeah.
thank you for taking the time. And it's just so interesting to hear your thoughts about all of these different things and also your perspective on faith in your own experiences. I could talk to you for hours. So yeah,
No,
maybe next time a follow-up conversation.
yeah, but thank you. Thank you for doing this. I love everyone's conversation you have.
Thanks. I feel like sometimes there's things that we wonder about, and I learn the most from just talking to other people about whether it's their faith or their career and how their experiences have really helped shape them. So thank you
Yeah.
for talking about your life and talking about these issues that are currently going on.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you. Thank you. And I cannot wait until a vaccine comes out so we can actually meet in person again.
Yes, for sure. Now, do you have any protests that you have planning on attending today or
um,
upcoming?
Nothing today, but BLM and Build Power, who I've been protesting with, they've been actually at City Hall every Wednesday for the last 3 years. So they had been doing it consistently all the time,
Yeah.
trying to ask Jackie Lacey, our to actually persecute cops that have been there's evidence of their brutality. So it's kind of like a more long-term, consistent thing
Hmm.
to actually just put pressure. We've seen the fruit of that pressure already a little bit in the Minnesota case. So it's just continuing that pressure on.
Yeah.
So yeah, a more long-term thing. Yeah,
Yes. It's good to see that progress, even though it might not be
yeah,
huge. It's good to see some steps moving forward.
little by little, little by little.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Well, have a great day. I will talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye.